All right, guys, welcome back to the Existential Lounge. Little hiatus we took last week with the political talk. Thank you guys; those videos are doing amazing. But today we're diving into masculinity. We're going to be talking about the struggles that I think a lot of young men face with both the olden view of what masculinity was meant to be, along with the ever-changing okayness that society had with what masculinity is today. And just a sort of disclaimer we want to put out there before we get into it is that we believe, as two young males that have grown up in today's world, we are more apt to talk about these issues. And by no means are we doing a comparison thing. This isn't a we have it worse than others. By no means do we want to get thrown into that red pill world. But we just feel that we have, from experience, the ability to speak on these issues. And conversely, we think that there's a lot of issues on the other side as well that women face that we simply wouldn't be able to speak about with as much
insight or the same experience, right? Kind of conversation. Exactly. Like it brings a whole different sort of perspective into things when we can have someone and when we have that episode one day on femininity, we would absolutely love to have a woman on to give her first person anecdotal experience as to what that experience is.
Exactly. We wouldn't want to have an episode on something like that when we'd feel like we'd just be speaking on the periphery or on the outside looking into that experience. Whenever we do get around to that topic, we will definitely have a woman here that is able to speak on that. And I think that's going to be really important. So without further ado, let's get into it.
Yeah. Masculinity is something that has really changed lately, I think, where it existed for a long time as this one type of thing, and then as of late there's been more of this enmeshing of feminine traits with how men are expected to uphold themselves and conduct themselves. I think in many ways it's extremely positive. I think in one respect, if you take masculinity to its extreme degree, it becomes dangerous. If you take anything to its extreme degree,
I think that's it's something that I'm going to bring up probably with a lot of topics we talk on this channel, which is the idea of how views on things work in society on a pendulum. Where we ideally want to be is that happy middle, but pendulums never stop. You're always going to be going from this side to this side, back to this side, and back to the other one, always operating on the extremes. And I think that's what has happened with masculinity. We used to exist on this left extreme of be a man up, we're not supposed to cry, showing emotions that's not okay, head of the household, provider always. If you don't, then you don't have value as a man. If you're not strong, you don't have value as a man. And in an effort to course correct that, we've ended up on the extreme opposite, where now we have a lot of men that just don't have those traditional masculine traits, which it's hurting society. It definitely is. We see young men more scared to approach women. We see young men not having the people skills that are accompanied with being that strong, traditional, like step in a room, take everyone's attention type of man, because we're in an effort to move away from that olden age, have created today a more timid and just, I don't know if fragile would be the right word, but timid, I think it encompasses it well. That timid man that kind of just hides in his own shoulders.
Yeah, I think a lot of what we're seeing right now is a byproduct of recognizing that hypermasculinity has had a very dangerous effect on women in society, where holding them down, holding them back from progress and being what they have the capacity to become and be. But I think that the pendulum has now swung in a direction where it's benefiting women in a degree that it hasn't historically, which is great. But I think now, as a result, it's gotten to a point now where like men are kind of sinking, and we're seeing this across the board with so many different things, be it college graduate levels, right? Like for every woman that graduates, for every male that graduates, two are graduating for women.
And that reflects in the earnings.
Yeah.
So we're looking at guys that graduate from college have a statistically less chance to earn money than women. Non-college educated obviously have less than, and then the job prospects are lower. It leads men to have this purposeless life, this like increasing loneliness, because when you're not successful in a career, you're more unlikely to attract a partner. Without a partner, you're in this lonely cycle of just looking for these cheap dopamine releases.
Yeah, and there's an interesting thing you just brought up, like women, from what I've read statistically, or on average, have higher credentials for what they look for in men than what men do when they look in women.
Yeah, I've seen that also. Just anecdotally, I wouldn't say I have any numbers to pull up, but anecdotally, I do see that women tend to have a long list of this is what I need in a man, whereas a man usually doesn't have this amount, a large amount. It's more of just respectful partner that'll be there with me kind of guy.
Yeah. That
seems to be what most guys are looking for, whereas women will have a laundry list of credentials.
Absolutely. And you know, those dynamics where the woman is the breadwinner, what is the divorce rate goes up by 50%,
yeah.
I believe that was. It's interesting that this kind of socially, almost biologically ingrained drive that the man needs to be the provider, that we need to go out and do the hunting and gather the resources for women. It kind of goes back to the inherent psychology of the differences between men and women, and how men are in most ways very mission oriented, very point A to point B oriented,
right.
Very just directive, and we gain pleasure, we gain purpose from approaching that way and doing things of that nature, whereas women are very love oriented and develop that purpose and meaning through, you know, cultivating and deepening their relationships with their friends, with their families, with their loved ones, and nurturing, like bringing a nurturing essence to whatever scenario they may face.
I think it's important to point out, when you're saying these biological differences, by no means are we saying that these are absolutes. Of course, there's people that exist on the periphery of these things, and also I think that in almost reactionary impulse to how historically women have been pushed down by the patriarchy, they have like a visceral reaction to you saying that women are more naturally nurturing. And I think flipping the perspective that we have on these things, where saying that the biological and intrinsic drives that we have are different isn't necessarily a bad thing. And that's hard obviously to tell to someone who has historically, these things have been used to put them down, right?
Yeah, of course.
But I think that's the big thing, that we have to just have a mental switch in how we look at these things. We're not saying that because you're not the breadwinner or because you are at home nurturing, you're any less or any less important or any less powerful. It's just that traditionally and almost what seems to be biologically, we fulfill different roles in the development of our species.
Exactly, I agree with that. There isn't necessarily a better or worse role. I think that the inherent psychology that we have, both as men and women, works together in tandem. That's the right word there. And helps us to get to our goals more efficiently. I think that in many ways we complement one another to get to where we want to go.
Right, and I think a big argument for this is that we look at the development of children in two-parent households as opposed to single-parent households. In a household where a child has a mother and a father, they're more likely to go to school, more likely to have a career that pays more, less likely to be involved in crime, less likely to ever be arrested for a serious crime in their life, less likely to end up in jail, all these different things. And it seems to be that it's because biologically we just work better in this system where there's a two-parent household that cultivates the growth of this child, with each parent providing what they are biologically almost predisposition to do.
Yeah. You know what's strange though is that comparatively, women don't do as badly as men do in single parent households. What do you think are maybe some of the bigger contributing factors as to why that's the case?
Well, I think that single parent households tend to be fatherless. So it'll be a single mother, not just single parent.
Yeah.
It's usually single mother, and with that, the boy is missing that male figure in the household, and learning those things that are so important for a growing male. That while single mothers, myself, I was raised by a single mother. They do their best, and they're amazing, and I applaud them for what they do. But there's certain things that a young growing boy needs from a male figure in their life that they can't get from a single mother, and I think that plays a large part in why their development is not as good as a woman in a single household.
Yeah, I think it's pretty insane, the statistics on that. Like almost around 32% of all US boys don't have a father. That's huge.
Sorry, what was that number?
32%.
32% is crazy.
Yeah, 32% without a biological father. And statistically, it's almost double the percentage of boys living apart from their biological father in 1960. 1960 was about 17%. This is skyrocketed.
That is nearly double.
Yeah, and I think a huge issue is, you know, statistically, all of the issues that come from, you know, boys not having a father, like for instance, you know, 85% higher for going to prison, 90% of homeless and runaway children are like fatherless homes. What's even worse, in my opinion, just what is in schools, right? 75% of all primary and secondary school teachers are female. So if you're not having a guiding male in the home, where is a boy going to look to for some sort of man that they could look up to and admire and respect?
100%. I think that happens a lot in sports.
Yeah.
I think that is a great outlet for that. To just go back to my own anecdotal experiences, coaches did suffice that role for me, or in part at least, I'd say. Definitely they play that role where any sport you play, those coaches will be there for you, and a lot of times they provide that attention that a boy needs from an adult male.
That makes sense. And that's if they go into sports. I think that
right. It's a very niche part. Like not every little boy is gonna like sports.
For sure, and especially nowadays, I think that being active is so much more difficult than ever for people to get themselves into doing when we have so much easy, instant gratification at our fingertips.
Right.
You know, both in the ways that we eat and in our entertainment. I think nowadays, from what I've observed, like it seems like a lot more kids are opting for playing video games than going out and like learning a new sport or whatever it may be.
That starting out so early in young boys leads to that addiction to cheap dopamine.
Yeah.
So from the beginning, they're not going out in sports, they're not going out socializing, so they go home, play these video games hours on end where they can play with the settings of difficulty as much as they want, make it super easy. You're just getting quick dopamine rush. I just scored another touchdown in Madden. I just beat another game.
Yeah.
And it's that rush of dopamine that they're not getting outside, and that traps them in a cycle as they continue to get older, is these cheap forms of dopamine that as they enter their adolescence and are starting to look at girls but don't have the social capabilities to go out and talk to them.
Yeah.
In terms of things like pornography, where again, cheap dopamine, the brain is set up in a way that it wants to work for the dopamine.
Yeah.
But when you're just constantly giving it these cheap dopamine rushes, it gets addicted to that, and it makes the other aspect worse, where you're not working for things anymore, right? So why do that? Why do I have to go out and try to talk to people? Why do I have to go to the gym and try to get in shape? If I can get the dopamine releases without needing to put in the work, why do it?
For sure. I think, you know, and neither of us have anything against video games. Obviously, everything in balance.
Yeah.
However, I think that you can analyze them where, you know, they offer so much of what we want in real life. You want to be a hero that's like battling things and saving
Play
people.
Spider-Man,
Yeah, or you want to be a amazing athlete, you can go do that.
Create your player in
Yeah, you want to be
2K now lets you scan your face and you literally see yourself on the court.
100%. Imagine, you're like a Marine, like fighting in a war alongside your friends with mics on, you're communicating, you're doing violent things.
It's almost like you're living your whole life vicariously through these things.
Completely, and I think that's what so much of a big draw is, but you realize in doing those things that you're not actually moving in those ways, you're not actually confronting the monster, you're not slaying the beast, your fingers are, and the character in the screen is that you're living vicariously through, and that's where I think most of the pleasure is derived from, is that, feeling as though you are that being, but you're not actually developing the skills and the courage that would be required to actually do those things.
Right. To call back to an episode we did a bit ago, I remember the quote about finding a struggle worthy of you.
Correct.
And this never lets you even look for a struggle, because you're getting those dopamine rushes that should come from that struggle without ever needing to go through it.
And I think something that's so integral to a struggle is the reality of failure. The reality of, like, if I take this on, I could fail and it could hurt, it could be awful, I may lose things, money, my parts of my health, whatever it may be. But in video games, there's just a restart level.
Just restart. There's no
fear.
There's none at all. There's no consequence for failure.
Correct.
And there needs to be. And a little bit of a segue there, I think that's another thing that has hurt them, is that we've historically, some children that were not great at, say, athletics, they were pushed aside because they weren't good enough, right? They were bullied, they were belittled. And in an attempt to correct that, we've started giving out trophies for almost everything. And I understand, I get the reasoning behind it, right? Like, I want to help that little kid too that isn't getting the attention he wants because he's just physically unable to be as good as the 6'2" guy, right? But that creates that issue again where you need to fail. You need to fail in order to be great. If we're telling kids that getting 8th place on some competition is success, what do they grow up to do? They expect to be 8th place because people gave me pats on the back for 8th place. No, we need to tell kids that you failed and that you didn't win. You're not number one, but get up and go try again. Get up and keep trying, no matter how many times you fail. I think that's how you try to move away from the bullying of, oh, you failed, you're not good enough. What we have to move away from is belittling the failure, and rather changing the perspective that the child has on failure as it not being an end. It's just another opportunity being granted to you.
I think people are really afraid of that. I think that people are afraid of failure in the same way that they're afraid to enter relationships because it could go south. I think there needs to be a massive shift in the way that we look at suffering, and that if you're suffering within reason, within a reasonable amount of suffering, that a lot of times you could be on a good path, and that there's a lot of wisdom
Most of the
to
times,
gain.
nothing good comes without some suffering.
Exactly.
Nothing. The easiest example that we always bring up, because it's just so in your face, it's the gym. It hurts when you're trying to push through that last set, get through failure, and even try to get some half reps in at the end, right? That hurts. It is painful, but you know that is going to give you something in the end. And that's what we need to have, that outlook on everything in life.
I think a massive driver for why people aren't doing this is, I think a lot of these young boys are already in the dumps. They're already feeling like they're not belonging. Their home life sucks. Even if they do have a father that, maybe the father doesn't have good communication style where they can be vulnerable and really connect with them in a profound way that helps them to feel like they have a good connection there. And I think that these things existing, you're already in a hard situation, so doing more hard things is just going to feel like a lot. Why do those things when that doorway to, like, oh hey, video games, oh hey, whatever it may be, the easy dopamine, it's there, take that. Like, it's easier to make that choice.
You know what I think causes that disconnect, especially in our generation, between us and fathers that are even present? Remember how we were talking about the pendulum, where it used to be over here and now it's all the way over here? You almost have two opposite end style of men trying to communicate with each other, and it just doesn't work. Where the generation before us was you're not allowed to show emotion, you're not allowed to be weak. Anything that is but a stoic disposition is automatically weakness. That's the that's what the generation before us is looking at. And then you have our generation, which has been raised on telling us emotions are okay, show them. And some of us may have become overly so in that aspect.
Yes.
Now you have two people that are trying to communicate, which clash ideologically completely.
Absolutely.
And that causes that rift, that inability to have those important conversations because neither of them are existing in that happy medium where you were supposed to be.
Yeah, and I think another was really well put. I think that on that, it makes sense that they have this like no emotion, be strong, get your hands dirty, all this type of like mentality because they're the protectors of the household. There's a lot of, I think that men oftentimes feel crushed by the weight of the expectations placed on them for their roles in society.
They do.
And I think a lot of the times it could feel overbearing, overwhelming. It's a lot. Where is the family going, right? So the money is placed on you. Someone breaks in, you're the one who's grabbing the gun or putting up the hands and you're going after it.
It's expected of you. You're always going to be that protector, provider.
Exactly.
It's a weight that almost seems insurmountable. To touch on the thing again earlier that we were just speaking about the generation before us, I think a good example, we're currently like a lot of people watching Peaky Blinders, and the main character, Tom Shelby, you see where he constantly needs to do opium to go to sleep at night.
Yeah.
Because the PTSD that he's suffering from World War I is keeping him up. But as soon as he wakes up and walks out that door, straight face to everybody.
100%.
And I think that's a theatrical and dramatic expression of what a lot of men are going through.
Absolutely. Alcoholism, drugs, or just essentially detachment, kind of like that quiet suffering where the man recedes into his own mind and into his kind of his own like little fortress
it's
from the world, to cope.
An extremely unhealthy coping mechanism. One that, I don't know if we have the numbers here in front of us, but suicide rates amongst men are so extremely higher now than women.
The number one cause of death for men aged 18 to 40 is suicide.
That is
number one.
Terribly concerning and just disheartening to hear.
Yeah.
It's because we have that, I think that term you used was really descriptive, it was really good, is that silent suffering.
Yeah.
We have a suffering that we feel we're not allowed to talk about, a suffering that if I talk about, I'm looked down upon. My man points are taken away if I talk about my mental health.
Yeah.
And it's just a world that I don't think, again, not to compare, but women don't need to have that because sharing amongst women is so accepted. Mm-hmm. Whereas I forget what thing we were reading or listening to where men can't even sit and look at each other face to face. We work better if we're shoulder to shoulder.
Yeah.
It's those small things where you realize how the male psyche is working that we can't sit here and say, hey, I'm having a really bad day and this sucks.
Yeah.
Because we have that inability that that's been taught and ingrained inside of us that your suffering is meant to be in silence because you're solving other people's problems. People aren't here to solve yours.
Definitely. And I think that the statistics are just speaking for, rather than the actual healthy coping mechanisms of communication, a father sitting down and expressing what they're holding inside. Yeah. Right? Like instead they're resorting to all sorts of like the statistics I have in front of me that 3 times likely to overdose, 4 times likely to commit suicide, 14 times likely for incarceration. 98% of all mass shooters are men. And I think another statistic that's insane is 45,000 fewer boys than girls graduate high school each year. Wow. It's hard to commit yourself to school when you feel lost and you don't feel truly connected.
Also, in an ever-changing world where technology is advancing so much more, historically, those males that weren't going to school, right, weren't graduating high school, weren't going to college, there was factory jobs. Factory jobs that back then their pay was enough to raise a family, enough to buy a home. Yeah. Now these men that are not pursuing further higher education, these jobs don't exist anymore, and the ones that do aren't enough to sustain a family.
Yeah. And a lot of these are just becoming automated.
Yeah. factory jobs are disappearing.
Yep.
Truck driving jobs. I remember Andrew Yang was talking about that. How we're like 5 years away from trucking jobs being automated.
Yeah. And think about men are overrepresented in these fields.
Completely.
Like they are vast majority of workers in these fields like production, transportation, construction. All of these are almost exclusively men.
Yeah.
And if they're becoming automated, these men without degrees who may have families and don't know where to go, what are you gonna do?
Right.
You know, that the weight, the existential weight of that is unbearable.
Yeah.
It's not only just like what am I gonna do? No, like what am I gonna do for my family? How do I provide?
And it removes those
Yeah.
main things that give man purpose.
Yeah.
We like to problem solve for our family. We like to provide for our family, and we like to protect.
Yeah.
You're removing our ability to provide. Without a home, you're removing our ability to protect.
Yeah.
And it seems that everything that gives a man purpose is being removed piece by society.
Yeah. And I think that kind of ties into the conversation about these men aren't going to college as much at all in relation to women. I think, what was it, 7 out of like 8 or something high school valedictorians are women and all.
Mm-hmm.
If they're not getting their degrees, right, which you're already, if you get a degree, you're making twice as much as someone without a degree,
Right.
on average. You're so limited with what you can do, and that's having, with so much pressure on the job and fulfilling our purpose, right? And your options become increasingly limited because of the automation, because of your lack of degree, because of your lack of education, because of now your lack of social skills and all these other things. Men are kind of left going, I don't know what I'm able to do.
Yeah, you're left in that spot where nothing, a situation that already had limited options seems to have even less now.
Yeah.
And what are men supposed to do in these situations? It's extremely just scary position to find yourself in, and that's once you're already an adult. So we're talking after all the stuff we touched on, growing and developing as a child, a young man, to being an adult, and it seems like every step of the way there's just no guardrails, right?
Yeah.
There's nothing that helps you, tells you the way, especially if you don't have that father in the home.
Yeah, or the father in the school, or wherever it may be.
Yeah.
I think that it's become increasingly more difficult to find supporting roles that are males, because the openness, the vulnerability is something that past generations weren't conditioned and exposed to, which are so integral to healthy social dynamics.
Right. And I think an important aspect to point out here is how this has disproportionately affected minority households, because minorities are more likely, I forget the exact numbers off the top of my head, but they're more likely to be arrested for petty crimes such as marijuana use, and that's been taking minority fathers out of homes since Reagan's war on drugs.
Yeah.
And that just creates that vicious cycle of this young boy now doesn't have a man to tell him how to be a man.
Yeah.
He grows up being he's essentially just a boy in a man's body, and then he ends up getting another woman pregnant, who then he's not in the picture, and that little boy's left in his same situation, and it just continues that cycle of fatherless homes for these young kids.
100%.
And what we're left, like I said earlier, is just a bunch of boys in men's body.
Yeah.
You know, another thing that I think is important is how there doesn't seem to be any spaces for boys to be boys. Like, even saying boys will be boys seems to be a taboo thing to say nowadays, you know? It seems like every area that was a safe space for boys has been getting taken away. Like, locker room talk is not allowed to be locker room talk anymore, which understandably so. I get that there were situations where some of those things were too much, some of those things may have teetered on the edge of being inappropriate and all these other things, but I think that by taking that away completely, you've taken away that space where young boys are developing and learning to be young men, you know?
Yeah, wasn't it? What was the name change that happened with Boy Scouts? It's
Right, the
now-
Boy Scouts of America aren't a thing anymore. It's just, I
Yeah.
think it's like just Boy Scout or Scouts something of America. These things that, what's more like historically and just traditionally masculine than going out there in the woods, tying some knots, all these things that the Boy Scouts used to do, that's not a space for boys anymore.
Yeah.
And not to say that we don't want women in these spaces, right? I think that it's important for both of them to have these spaces where it's just for them.
Yeah.
Because as we stated before, there are biological differences in how we tick. We just work differently. And I think it's important that these young boys and young girls have these spaces that are tailor-made to help their development best.
Yeah, it seems that, you hear the term toxic masculinity thrown around a lot, but I don't think I've ever heard anyone say toxic femininity.
No, it's not a thing.
It seems that you take masculinity to the highest degree it can go, it becomes awful and toxic. You take femininity to the highest degree that it can go, and it becomes this empowered, boss woman, who's like super loving.
And I think that's a result of how masculinity has been used, which is why I think that the most important thing to do here is not fight the other side like, oh, but you get to do this and I don't get to do this, etc. It's, guys, let's get together and understand that we need both of us to prosper.
Yeah.
We need both of us to be the best form of us that can be in order for society to be the best that it can be.
Yeah, and we can only do that together.
Understanding. We need to understand each other, understand the things that each one needs for proper development, and empower each other to reach those things.
Yeah.
And it seems like in like so many other things in society, it's become this us versus them. And it just, I don't understand that outlook that so many people have of, in order to empower me, I have to put down the next side, right?
Yeah, I think it's almost like a revenge thing or it can come off that way where, it becomes socially acceptable to oppress the historical oppressor.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think, it's happened with white men recently where, it's socially okay to be like, look at a bunch of like white guys, or just say something about like white men in a negative connotation. It's more okay than saying, about another race.
Right.
And if you do that, it's shamed. I think in the same way, a woman could say something like, I can't stand men, like men are all the same or whatever. But if a guy is to say that same thing about women in a public like circle, a whole different reaction kind of happens. And I think that it's due to that, where it just becomes over time socially okay to have oppressive kind of language.
Become where everything that is traditionally masculine has become demonized in society. So where does that leave a young boy who he feels like he wants, like there's internal things in him that want to go out and be like rough. Like boys are rough, boys will like hit each other and playfully, they might get hurt, that happens. He'll be fine. That's one of those situations where it should be okay to just say boys will be boys. But when he has all these feelings that he needs to, that he just wants to do, and society's telling him all of it is wrong, it creates this internal identity crisis in young boys that it leaves them in no man's land, really.
For sure. What's your take on, dating apps is a whole new phenomenon. It's something that has never really existed in this way before, and so meeting people is now existing in this new medium, unprecedented, and it's having a lot of impact socially. How do you feel that this is having an impact in the masculine conversation?
I think that it takes away, again, so when we're looking at the numbers on these things, the amount of swipes that a guy gets compared to a woman are drastically less.
Yeah.
So who's the guys that are going on these things mostly? Guys who aren't able to go out in public and talk to a girl in the more traditional sense, right?
Yeah.
So these guys that already have a low self-esteem, these guys that don't know how to talk to women, and when they've sat on this app for 5 hours of the day swiping yes on all these girls and none of them swipe back yes, that just deteriorates that mental health even more.
I think it's interesting the timing makes sense, but it's interesting the timing in which this thing came into being, where and young men aged 18 to 30 spent nearly 20% more time alone in 2023 than in 2019.
Yeah.
Social media and technology has had a way of making us, connect in many ways, but it's also made us all become hermits in many other ways.
Yeah, 100%.
And the timing where we're becoming increasingly more isolated, right? Boom, dating apps come up. And so during a time frame in which it's historically unparalleled, where we're having social interaction issues, eye contact, confidence, all these things are just missing, social media is filling that gap with like, hey, having trouble doing those things? It's so much easier to send a message to that pretty girl through a message, a screen, rather than
as
going up to her.
approaching
Yeah, in a
person.
social situation, doing it in a respectful way, doing it in a way that is not only memorable, likable, makes you seem interesting, all of these things. It's very complicated, and it goes back to that thing where I think people are just having more and more of a tendency towards taking the easy route than the hard route.
Yeah, 100%.
And it is interesting that women are getting a lot more attention than men, but I think it's because a lot of that confidence and a lot of the traits, these deficits that are existing and permeating through men, they're presenting themselves here.
Mm-hmm.
I think there was the statistic that 54% of women say they felt overwhelmed by the number of messages they received on dating apps in the past year, when just a quarter of men say the same. By contrast, 64% of men say they have felt insecure because of the lack of messages they received, while 4 in 10 women say the same. It's interesting because I think that there's a phenomenon happening where these men who are on these apps already feel insecure, so they're on the apps,
right.
and the apps are just acting as this they're just confirming it to them. Mm-hmm. They're like, okay, I'm having trouble meeting girls. I'm going on the dating app. I'm messaging that girl, right? Because it's easier, but I'm not getting the attention. I'm swiping, but I'm not getting attention.
Yeah.
And it just, I think it deepens that issue, and I think it's fueling this like whole incel movement, which has been happening, where men just feel like undesirable and they become resentment towards women.
Yeah,
resentful.
Yeah, they get this resentful outlook towards women, and it's just, I think, fueled again by that societal push of us versus them. Mm-hmm. It's just, and to touch again on the dating apps thing, I think it's important to see how also all these dating apps have started adding extra incentives to pay more for the guys that don't get that attention. I think you can super like people on Tinder and stuff like that. So you pay some money and this girl might give you some more attention. It just continues to degrade the self-worth of that man.
Absolutely. I think it makes perfect sense that in a world where it's become increasingly more difficult for men to find men that they look up to, that embody masculine traits that they inherently feel driven towards identifying with, that, for instance, Andrew Tate is a figure that has blown up recently, and I don't think it's by any mistake. I think that
he's filled that void. He's filled that void that society has. There's young men that don't have a father in the home, don't have strong males at school that can lead them, aren't into sports, or all these different things. There's just, in every facet of their life, they're missing that strong male figure. And here comes along this guy on the internet who's shirtless with a six-pack, big muscles, says he gets all the girls, big money, cigar, fast cars. And he says all these wild things that's just going to reel in these young boys who are just thirstful for that guidance that they lack so much. So they gravitate towards guys like him.
Yeah, I'm laughing or smiling just because guidance. Pun. I think he's representative though of when a deficit exists. A lot of the times we take something to an extreme level, and I think that a lot of what he says is that hyper masculine, kind of getting into that dangerous area for sure.
More than dangerous, he's definitely gone over the line multiple times. Things that are just outlandish for the sake of being
justifying cheating and things of that nature,
domestic violence, etc. Obviously, the charges that are levied against him right now, big deal.
But I think that there are also more in the middle ground, right? We've spoken about Chris Williamson before,
Yeah.
where he has people on there that have done amazing things, and males that have pursued careers and implemented elements of discipline, like Andrew Huberman, into their life, where you have this guy who is just talking about healthful optimization through nutrition and movement and awareness.
All of these guys, Joe Rogan, Alex Hormozy, all these guys are serving as that for young men who just need that guidance.
Yeah, I think a lot of these people, adding to that, Jocko Willink, like there's so many now, these figures, David Goggins, Jocko Willink type of people, where these men growing up in these single, parent households, the women households, I think men inherently crave this almost military-esque type of discipline sometimes, where it's like they want someone in their ear saying, get up, look, go after the fucking day, make yourself amazing, refine yourself, work hard, find your purpose, get up, like 100%, do something.
I think that traditionally, like we were talking about earlier, how a mother and a father fulfill different roles.
Yeah.
The mother is that warm embrace when you fail, that tells you it's okay, that tells you, which is important, and 100% is important.
Absolutely.
But when that other side isn't there for the male, the one that tells him, hey, just get up.
Yeah.
You'll be fine. Get up and try again. Get up.
What can you do better next time?
Get up. And that I think that's why they're looking for that almost drill sergeant of a figure to listen to, that one that'll tell them, like, they're tired of being hugged every time that they fall. I don't want to be hugged anymore.
Participation trophies. Yeah. I think that's just created that deficit, and I think that it's indicative. I think that these people are going to this thing that seems right. I'm hoping that many recognize it's not, but it's representative of something that's still almost refreshing, in a sense, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because so many hardened men are just kind of missing. It's hard to find those men that are hardened but simultaneously are respectful or career driven, just accomplished.
I think respect. That how we were saying that what is traditionally masculine is being demonized, that removes the ability for these strong male figures to be there for young men, which is what leads to things like Andrew Tate and all of Sneeko and these type of guys, Fresh and Fit. That
they're symptoms of that problem.
Yeah, they 100% are, because when you don't allow for a healthy masculine role model, these unhealthy ones are going to just keep sprouting. And that's what men are starting to gravitate to, in the absence of that positive male thing. And I think that's what happens when you make a whole 50% of society not okay to be.
Yeah.
You're the fuel for the illness, essentially.
Yeah. I think we're seeing this in we brought up video games earlier. I think that like a lot of masculine figures are still missing from that too now, where you have characters that are traditionally masculine that have been dumbed down in many ways. And I think that we're seeing that in movies. We're just seeing that in so many different areas, where I think no matter where men look, trying to find an admirable male that embraces masculine traits within balance, it's just difficult to find. It's very 100%
difficult. Is. You look at historically, like Superman, Batman, all these characters that were big, strong men, that's been like dialed back. I think this is a small nitpick, but it's something to like look at, is the difference between how just in 2012 with the Man of Steel movie, the difference in fit of the suit of Superman then, to show the traditional masculine physique, to what is coming up in the upcoming Superman movie, where it's a much more loose, much more boyish Superman as opposed to Superman.
I see that. That makes sense.
I think that traditional male look is it's almost being discouraged in young men. I love the new Batman movies, this, but
for sure,
let's not be truthful here. Robert Pattinson isn't that Batman of the comics that's ripping through shirts.
Yeah, the bulky, muscular, stubble going on.
Right. You got the Hulk being like thrown around by She-Hulk. that angry Hulk is gone. That doesn't really happen anymore. Professor Hulk now. Thor being so emasculated in the Avengers movies. That's actually, I think, a great point to bring up here is the almost comedic take on male mental health. So what they were trying to go for with Thor was he didn't kill Thanos when he had the chance, and as a result, Thanos kills half of the world.
Yeah,
he loses so many friends. That turmoil, that weight on him that he failed his responsibility as Thor, responsibility as a man, and I think that's a great character device to take further into to explore how men have this weight on them that when they don't fulfill crushes them. But with him, it became a joke. It became Fat Thor playing Fortnite.
Yeah.
That's just, I think, indicative of how society looks at male mental health.
Yeah, it's definitely a crisis right now where what do they do when they have these mental health issues? You know, women have these support systems with their friends where they're so much more inclined to being vulnerable and open and crying and expressing, I am dealing with shit. And you know, men, it's kind of this taboo topic. We're going to talk about sports, we're going to talk about lifting, we're just going to like ignore the absolute hell that we're in right now and keep pushing together, and hopefully like we blink and we're out of it. Doesn't really work that way. And I think that like you need that through the process. You need those support systems where you can absolutely just open your heart up to your friends and admit like, I'm not okay. And I think that a lot of people out there, how many people do you have that you can look to and say that?
I think we're reading this book right now, The Way of the Superior Man.
Yeah.
And it talks about how you should want the men around you to hold you accountable for stuff like that.
Absolutely. And if they're not friends.
They're not. You want, that's something we need. We need that around us. Is if Brandon's doing something that I know that we both ethically disapprove of, he knows I will call him out, and likewise backwards, and we appreciate that. We need that, and it's something that you guys want to look for in people around you. You always remember that you're the culmination of the 5 people you're mostly around, and surround yourself by those people that will hold you accountable always.
Yeah, I think on what he just said about giving criticism is when you have someone close to you and you see their intentions, always stick to that, because you know, I may say something that at face value could be hurtful or like, damn, that's like a crazy critique, but you look at the intentionality behind what fueled that insight, and it's, I just want the best for you.
Right.
That helps to, I think people can be afraid and tiptoe around it, like, oh my God, I want to say these things, I can't stand that quality in you, or like, you really got to fix this, but I don't want to hurt your feelings. But the feelings fail to be hurt when all I see are your intentions and goodwill towards that. And that if I'm doing something that's hurting me or doing something that's holding me back from being better, you calling me out is indicative that you just want the best for me and that you're supporting me. And if you're not
to call back again to an earlier episode, that idea of if someone says something negative of you, 2 possibilities are true. Either it's completely untrue, so you shouldn't be bothered, or the second option, which should be what all your friends are doing, is if there is truth to the statement, internalize it, analyze, and fix the problem.
Yeah, and implement it. Absolutely. It's an extremely stoic perspective that, I mean, it opens you up to receiving any criticism you could possibly ever have. And you're not afraid to give it, you're not afraid to receive it. And I think that's something, it's interesting because I feel like that process is both extremely masculine but also feminine too. Receiving it, or excuse me, giving it right in this nurturing way, but like simultaneously, it takes a lot of like courage to be like, you know what, you have these things. It's that confrontation. It's like picking apart and analyzing you and saying there's something off here. I think that it kind of interestingly, like,
because I think that that's the way that everything works, honestly.
Yeah.
Like we said, these extremes aren't real. These extremes don't exist. The extreme of masculinity over here and the extreme of femininity over here don't exist. Everything is in this happy medium, and we just have to learn how to maneuver through that.
Yeah. I think that, you know, we were reading those interesting things recently about regarding like men in therapy and how it doesn't seem to be really designed for men, where men work best shoulder to shoulder and the eye contact. This how can men expect to open up in a therapy setting and to really get the most out of it?
Not tailored to what works for you biologically.
Yeah, and or if just historically, more likely than not, you just haven't even developed those skills. You haven't been exposed to the necessary sort of settings where you haven't had that before. To sit down with someone, to sit down with another male or woman and truly be completely vulnerable. You're only going to get your money's worth by doing that.
Like any viewers watching, if it's a guy, think about it. Women can sit down with the intention of trying to go through an issue they're having and talk it out with their friend. That's something that women are able to do. With men, we don't sit down and just talk about our problems. We need to be diverting attention to something else while the problem is kind of being spoken about in the background.
100%.
Like we can play basketball. Like if we're playing pickup basketball, just talking while we're shooting around, playing pool, throwing a football. There always seems to a necessity for that auxiliary thing that detracts attention from we're sitting here talking about our feelings.
Which kind of makes sense, because if you go back to it, the biggest drivers for interaction amongst women is love and is of nurturing that kind of thing that they automatically feel. I mean, you look at it, the social conditioning of when you have like a new girl is born, right? The toys are dolls and things that they want to take care of, your baking, things of that nature. But it's important to recognize that we just all have different needs. Kind of lost my train of thought there, but I think that the only way that we can be the best versions of ourselves is when we have those situations that fuel what we need.
100%. I think that a good way to almost wrap all this up is there's this short by Chris Williamson where he was talking about changing the perspective, the definition of the term man up. Where man up used to mean push down your emotions, forget about it, keep pushing forward. We moved away from saying that because that was the definition we attached to it. Switch it. We don't need to stop saying man up. We need to switch what man up means. It means look at what you're feeling, understand what you're feeling, internalize it, fix the problem, and keep moving forward. So when we're saying man up, don't move away from that. We need to tell each other to man up. Guys, we need to keep doing that. Do it amongst your friends. If your friend's doing something that isn't in alignment with what you guys know you want to be, man up. Hey, bro, what you're doing is wrong. This, and this. That's why. And if they're on that same wavelength with you, they're going to understand and also apply and internalize the critique, the criticism, and fix the problem. I think that kind of wraps up what I think we wanted to dive into today. It's a hard one to talk about because it's something we're maneuvering as well, right? But we'll see you guys next time, right?
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.